next guest.
Perfect. Actually, well, yeah.
There's Janae right there.
Hi, Janae.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us.
Are we recording?
Oh, there we
already?
go.
Thanks for having us.
We're already recording? Oh my gosh.
This is
what happens. We start chit-chatting, and usually it's an entirely different non-podcast related conversation.
Right.
Well, that's what makes for the fun openers, though, right?
Exactly.
I love listening to podcasts where they have a total non sequitur opening.
We were talking about Ron's new lifestyle, mindset, mentality, diet.
Yeah. So last week when I jumped on, I was on a 3-day water fast, guys. So alkaline water only with a little pink Himalayan salt. It's a whole lot of health benefits. I'm happy to share the video. So this is like this is 1 week after that. And there's post the 3-day water fast, just kind of committing to raw vegetables and all that stuff. Yeah. And I'm down 19 pounds. And the point is not to lose weight though, but it's really, yeah, I know, right? Janae is crazy. But it's really looking at healing the body.
I'm with Janae.
Yeah, healing the body.
I would have gone from water to cheeseburger. Like,
exactly.
That would have been my trajectory.
Resolutions? Are you just getting a head start on things, Ron?
No, so this is what happened. One of my colleagues at work, Gabe, he and I have been going on forth and like trying to eat healthy, be healthier, go to the gym, all that stuff. And so Gabe started this diet, and he was like coming in and he was telling me about it. I'm like, bro, you're nuts. Like, that's ridiculous. No one's doing that. And then I watched him go from
total transformation.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. He was 206 pounds. He's like 178 now, and he did it in like 31 days. And it had everything to do with what he consumed. And so I got plugged into, I'll say this one piece, and then we can get into that. So what really made me buy in was the reality of understanding how the body works in some capacity, so that if you take in a lot of toxins with most of the food that we eat your body then creates spaces to store it, because it's like, dude, we can't put this in the bloodstream. The blood has to maintain a pH balance of like 7.5.
Except for cheeseburgers.
Eat cheeseburgers.
Yeah.
I'm on this tight time. But so all those toxins, the body's like, oh, we got to put those somewhere. And so it creates fat cells, and it stores the toxins in fat cells so that it doesn't get into the blood and create toxic situations like acidosis so you got to, so that's what I'm doing.
I'm proud of you. You're really sticking to it. So,
yeah, all water with salty water for 3 days does not sound like my jam, but I'm glad you're feeling good, Ron.
But Em and Janae, at the same time, this is connected to our conversation on data.
Yes.
Because,
okay.
No, it is, because as I thought about this more and more, and I was listening to this Harvard data science podcast in preparation for this one. And they said something like 30% of the data we have worldwide now is like health-related data. 30% of all the data we have in the world is health-related data.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so if we have that much data, and then you think about how toxic our food is, and then from a government perspective, what they put into urban environments, specifically even through our school systems, like the FDA, knowing that prisons and schools are classified under the FDA as the same, right? But we have data saying that this is completely unhealthy. This is not what we should be feeding kids. And then kids in urban environments are getting this food, which we know they shouldn't get, but it continues to happen because there's a profit margin connected to it. And so I just think about when you have this much data, and we can jump into the conversation, but like this is where I was saying like all this is connected.
Welcome to the ripple effect, a nonprofit imperative.
This makes me think of also the question when you said that 30% of the data worldwide is health related, who's deciding what healthy and unhealthy is?
Exactly.
Because we work with a lot of perinatal organizations that we work with a lot of birth workers. And so they're specifically measuring maternal health outcomes, particularly for communities of color that, there's an epidemic of Black mothers dying in the US. And so, to them, like they're trying to say like, this is what healthy should be. They're trying to define health for themselves and their communities in a way that pushes back on some of those like national definitions that are being decided by people who are not from this community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's welcome officially into the Ripple Effect.
Already getting going. I love it.
Carr and Janae Teal of the Capacity Collective. And I'm Ron Waddell, one of the co-hosts with...
And Marybeth Campbell. So nice to meet you both, Em and Janae. I'm the CEO of Worcester Community Action Council and great friend and partner to LL and Ron, thankfully. So happy that we're doing this.
Absolutely. So just to give our listeners a little insight into, before you guys say who you are, I got to know Em and Janae actually by a Google search. It was really, and it was connected to this conversation we're going to have around data and how that impacts nonprofit work and all the conversations we're having around that. But I became aware of them because we had signed up with a large data platform, and we paid quite a bit of money. Thank you to Blue Cross and other funders that allowed us to get access to this. But what I didn't know, or I was naive about, was then I had to build the system. And so while trying to do the work on the ground, it was like, well, how are we going to build this system? And so all my staff were like, Ron, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm not building this. Like, I don't got time to do that. And so I just started Googling data architects, and the Capacity Collective popped up. I think I emailed, I don't remember. I think I emailed you guys. And then we started this relationship, and they have been integral partner to us. Anyone who has started or implemented any sort of data system or a data transfer, you realize it's never done. You're always refining and tweaking. And so we've been working with the Capacity Collective for the better part, almost 2 years now, and refining our data. And so that's what brings them to the conversation. And then when I talk to them, they don't just construct data systems to collect. There's a whole plethora of things that the Capacity Collective offers. So with that said, Janae and Em, I'm not sure who wants to take the lead on it, but please introduce yourself and share a little bit about how the Capacity Collective came to be, because I think that story is really cool because you were already connected to social service work. And then some of the stuff you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'll just do quick intros. So I'm Janae Teal. I use she, they pronouns, and I am the Director of Programs with the Capacity Collective. And Em, go ahead.
And hi, my name is Carr. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a Senior Project Manager at the Capacity Collective.
Yeah, so I, as one of the co-directors, can definitely give you some background on our organization. The Capacity Collective was actually, it's kind of a weird origin story. So my wife and I, the co-director, we were actually living in Northern California. She was a professor and I was an analyst with the local county. And we got a call from a friend from grad school, and she was like, hey, I'm living up in King County in Washington State. And I just got an email from a friend that asked me to apply for this big, really innovative initiative through King County. And it was the idea of integrating data capacity building into grant funding. So when funders ask for data back, instead of kind of expecting organizations to do all of the collection and analysis and reporting on their own, integrate data capacity builders into that process. So we applied for this funding and we got it. And we had absolutely no idea what we were doing. The county was like, you are now data capacity builders. Here are 35 organizations, build their capacity. So for the better part of a year, we made up our jobs. And really what it centered in is listening. So you tell us what you need. You tell us what the gaps are. And about a year and a half into that work, the partner that we had started, it was her business originally. She decided to kind of change career paths, and we were left with this, kind of sticky point of what do we do? Do we keep this work going, or do we to kind of back out and go a different direction? And we were so invested, and we loved working with folks so much that we decided to buy her out and become the Capacity Collective. And we are almost on our third year anniversary. And we have expanded far beyond King County. And now we're working with folks actually globally. We just got our first out of the US client, which has been fantastic. But yeah, that's how the Capacity Collective came to be. And Em actually has the unique kind of origin story of how they joined us with the Capacity Collective. So Em, do you want to share your kind of how you became one of the compassionate nerds?
Yeah, absolutely. It's relevant to all of this too, because my background is not in data. My background is in nonprofit work. And for the past 10, 11 years before this job, I did direct service nonprofit work, mostly with young people, mostly doing case management with what some people would call at-risk youth. So I always was just a case manager, or maybe overseeing 2 case managers, just doing nonprofit work for years. And I've always been the person who's usually the youngest at the org. So I'm kind of good with computers. So a lot of the data stuff always sort of fell to me. And I loved numbers and spreadsheets and systems and graphs. So I kind of naturally always ended up doing a little more data stuff, but I didn't know that a job like this could exist. And then I was in Seattle in 2018, I was running a home visiting program for teen parents out of a Seattle nonprofit. And it was funded by the same grant that Janae's talking about, where as part of our grant, we actually were required to work with capacity builders in several different domains. So, I was fortunate enough to get to work with the Capacity Collective. I actually worked mostly with Marybeth at first. I didn't meet Janae for a long time. I just heard her name. Basically, because we were a brand new program, we didn't have any forms or data systems other than the existing agency-wide ones, the agency-wide intake form. And so Marybeth helped us design all of our forms and surveys. At the time, the org that I worked with, they had only just, they were still using largely paper. And then during the pandemic, transitioned to trying to use a more digital system, but they were locked into a contract with a really clunky database that didn't have a lot of flexibility. So I ended up basically working entirely out of Google Sheets. Marybeth taught me how to do a lot of different spreadsheet things. And I basically built an entire database in Google Sheets. I had all of the case notes in there. I had all of the clients in there. I had a dashboard that had live updates. I was doing reporting out of there instead of hand counting. So a lot of the tips and tricks that they showed me kind of changed my day-to-day life and gave me a lot more time. And then eventually I left that job and transitioned to a public health department job in a different county. But I kept in touch with Marybeth and Janae. And so when they decided to expand their team, I applied because I love doing this type of work. It's a fun puzzle for my brain, but I also know firsthand that sometimes even just showing someone a single Excel formula can dramatically change the ease of their day-to-day work in their job. And so it's really gratifying to do that. And I'll pass it back to Janae to talk more about how we started working with y'all, which Ron also mentioned too.
I was going to say, Ron touched on it. I'm just grateful for Google, and I don't even know how you found us.
Yeah, you guys popped up. Yeah, you popped up.
It was so interesting how it came to be, because when we started this work, we didn't anticipate being an apricot shop. So none of us really had much experience. We all dabbled, but we didn't really have true experience in database architecture or database management. We were not expecting to be a database shop. And when we became one, we decided to start advertising our apricot services on our website. And I swear it was within a week of posting our apricot service page to our website, we got an email from Ron. So I was this clearly was meant to be. And it was the perfect project for us.
It was providential. And so it's funny, before Marybeth goes here, so M was part of the capacity building of the Capacity Collective as they were helping people build capacity.
That is, it's very good. Well, I'm filled with a lot of questions for both of you. But Janae, you mentioned just in your decision around the transition in the sort of ownership and your colleague kind of moving on, that you just couldn't resist the excitement of what was happening. Can you talk, because among 35 organizations that you're working with, can you talk a little bit about what excited you? Because nonprofits tend to, when you talk about data or anytime a nonprofit, yeah, exactly, it's the sigh, right? And usually they don't have an M in the office who's particular, especially if they're case managers, particularly eager even to enter data, let alone manage it. Can you talk about that zeal a little bit, and how has that shaped into criterion of how you're selecting to work with particular nonprofits?
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer that last part first, because we have not turned down, we have no self-control. We have not turned down the project to date, because we'll meet with somebody, we'll hear about the work they do. And all 5 of us have done the kind of boots on the ground work. And we've seen firsthand, how painful data processes can be. That when we get in there and we start meeting with folks and we start, asking questions about the work they do, and we start asking, what's a day in the life of how your organization works, to hear and to understand and to see how meaningful the work is to these organizations, and to know that there's a very low chance that funders and even the community know the impact of their work. It's exciting, to know that we can go in and meet them where they are and develop really good relationships and show them through, relationship building and just investment in their organization, how it can transform their organization. And it's not just about funders. To us, it's the motivation from staff, folks who are like, I got into this because I really care about working, with these families. And then you see them and they're like, oh, I get my data in and I really care about it and I can see it. And the impact feels instant. You can see how much data can impact an organization almost instantly. And our clients often become friends and sometimes family, because we care about their work so much and they care about their work so much that really telling the rest of their story beyond the funder it's what gets me up in the morning, because funders are asking the wrong questions and organizations are doing work far beyond what is asked of them.
Yeah, I think that's the question.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead. I was going to ask Em, from your experience on the utility end, both in you described great learning and some of those tools, but were you able to witness some of that transformational change too?
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to talk. No, but I think, in my mind, there's this idea that data is exhausting, or that people aren't excited about data. But a lot of that is actually coming from bad systems. And that's not the fault of nonprofits. Sorry to funders, but it's often the fault of funders, either requiring that people use a particular system, and then people have to work in 6 different systems if they're going to get enough money to get their, program to run, or, requiring all of these different metrics that don't actually resonate with people. My experience is that when you put evaluation into the hands of an organization, especially the case managers and stuff, when you let them decide what is important to collect and see day to day, then they get excited about data. Then they get invested in the process. Why would you be invested or excited in something that you have no say over and that feels duplicative and kind of useless, So I think what's been so exciting is really, putting that back into the hands of the people who are doing the work and the data entry. Right now, we're working with a really, really small org, and we are doing a data review with them where we are working with everyone involved in their outreach, their syringe exchange, and asking everyone who does any part of work at the organization, what's important to you. And, they're going to be more excited to enter that data later because they had a say in what those metrics are. I think there's also a misconception that capacity building has to lead to the organization eventually doing all the work themselves. And even though we love when we can work ourselves out of a job, and sometimes that is realistic, sometimes an organization, does have a dedicated data person and we're training them, and, eventually we're going to, like I said, like not have to work with them anymore. Sometimes organizations are so small that they really just want to be able to focus on the community work and they want us to do the data work. And I don't think that's any less valid. I think that it's all about meeting people where they're at and hearing what their needs are and their priorities are. And their priorities are like, actually, we want you to keep administering our database while we focus on the real community work. That's fine, or if it's that we want you to train us so that we can take this over and we'll never have to see you again, that's so great. We just try to listen to people's needs.
What you just said there was one of the things that was huge for me. We have one of the projects we were working on, actually, our database, one of the grants has a prescribed database, and we have to use that specifically for our data. And I remember jumping on the call with M, and we were having a conversation with the administrator of that external database, and we were having this conversation. It was like, well, can we just export it, or can we import from you? Can we use this in any kind of way? And it was like, no, this is what it is. This is what you have to do. So that completely resonates with me, and even probably some of our listeners, right? Like this prescribed database that doesn't speak to the work you're doing. Can you even highlight a little bit more about the importance of especially a small nonprofit, like controlling their own data, having their own data, and being able to communicate that back out to the community as well, not just the funder, but also the internal loop that provides about what is impactful and what's not impactful, and their ability to kind of work through that and learn from the data. So, can you just talk a little about why that is so important, specifically for those that are listening to the call that may be funders or even our smaller nonprofits that aren't thinking about the data, that I'm just out here doing the work?
Right. Yeah, I think we can both touch on that. So I think one of the biggest limitations of having a system that is not your own or that you do not have control over is that you also don't get to choose how data is collected. And we see time and time again, folks completely modifying what they would collect or what they would ask from folks just to match what a funder wants. Or if the organization has capacity and they're able to collect data outside of what the funder wants, it often leads to multiple systems. It often leads to double and sometimes triple data entry, which talk about data quality over those, over that process, things are going to slip through the cracks.
And efficiency.
And staff get exhausted. No wonder there's a distrust and a frustration with data. Like you get up, you do your job, and it feels like all you're doing is responding to someone. You're doing it because that's how you're going to keep your nonprofit, your doors open. And it just doesn't feel, it feels self-serving from a funder's perspective. And I understand it. And we've worked with many funders who are great and cooperative. But at the end of the day, they are trying to collect data to justify why they gave that nonprofit funding. And it misses all the little nuances. It misses it doesn't tell the true story of your organization often, and you don't own your data. So when it comes time for you to tell your story, sometimes you put data into an external system and you get almost nothing back.
Right. That's what drives me, I think.
You look frozen.
Your face is frozen, but we hear you. We definitely hear you, but you have a lovely smile on your frozen screen. But if you can still hear, can you still hear us, Janae? Oh, she might have totally frozen.
We might have lost Janae, but we got him.
Yeah, we got him. Are you? So you described kind of being on the recipient end, and you left that job. What does the succession plan look like in terms of were you the sole owner of doing that, having that relationship with the capacity collector, or what? Yeah, what does that look like?
Yeah, well, that's a common thing that we run into. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah. Yep. Yes. Yeah.
That's a common thing that we run into just because, unfortunately, nonprofits have such high turnover, because of burnout, low wages. I mean, it's a problem in the industry. And so we really work hard to try to, even though we often end up, primarily working with like one person who's like our sort of point of contact at an organization, we always try to make things as sustainable as possible so that even if that person ends up leaving or, maybe let's think positively, they win the lottery and they're just like, I'm going to donate all of my money to charity and not do this job anymore. Like, it doesn't have to be for a bad reason, but we try to plan and document as much as possible. And, that often ends up looking, practically, if we want to think concretely, like documentation of our processes and our work together, leaving behind a lot of like training materials as to whatever we do, recording meetings and trainings that we put on, and also trying to make anything that we design as intuitive and user-friendly as possible to a wide range of staff so that we don't end up with, often we end up getting called in to work with nonprofits where like they did have a data person and that person designed a system that works super well for their brain, but then they left and no one else understands it. So we try to avoid that by like, even though, something might make perfect sense in my brain, like if it doesn't work for the staff and for the majority of people at the organization, I'm not going to.
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
So it's all about, sort of as documenting as much as possible and then also involving as many people in the process along the way as possible so that people understand from the beginning how it works and also, sort of have input so that it's not just designed to one person's brain. Did that answer your question?
Yes, very much. Are there any touch points later, like if once your sort of deliverable agreement relationship comes to an end, or maybe it doesn't, are there touch points that come along in the relationship with the Capacity Collective to make sure, even if somebody did leave the position and there's strong documentation just in terms of the quality and how it's being implemented?
Well, we try to leave, when we create training materials, we try to include our branding, not so that like, not as like a point of pricing, but so that people know that like this person created this on this date. And so if we are confused, we should reach out to them. Yeah. But also, honestly, it's very rare that we stop working with people because
that's what I was going to say.
we're lucky enough that, those original clients, 35 original clients. I don't know, Janae probably knows more exactly the number, but like a lot of them still work with us in some capacity, even if it's just like, we're going to hire you a couple hours a year to help with our reporting or something. We maintain super strong connections. Even if we don't have a formal contract with clients, they know how to reach us and they often do reach back out to us if they do need something. Yeah. Do you want to add to that, Janae?
Yeah. Really, relationships don't end. Like a contract might end, but we're in touch with everyone. And there's kind of two ways contracts change for us. There's the kind of intense hands-on stuff, and then it fizzles out in one of two ways. It either goes to a thought partnership relationship where, the data people in-house of these organizations are able to contact us and we do thought partnership. So we got a new funder. We're not sure how to integrate this into our system. How do we remain true to ourselves and our mission and our values, but also stay responsive to this new funder? And we'll think it out, but we let them take the lead because we ultimately want them to be the owners of this process. Or we transition into what we call an ongoing support process or package, where we just have really low touch points with folks. It's actually what we're doing with Legendary Legacies right now, where we're letting them drive and we're letting them make the decisions. But if it comes down to like, we're stuck, or hey, we're in a bind and we could really use your support on rocking this out, we're there. So I'm curious to see what happens when we do end relationships, because eventually that will have to happen. But we're not very far away from anyone. And I think we're in touch with, of the original 35, probably 28 we're still actively in contact with.
That demonstrates really awesome value. Yeah.
I was going to ask this question as connected. Here it is. So you guys are national and now international, right? Outside the borders of the United States. How I want to phrase this question. So you have federal and local, state sources of funding. And my question is around the challenge of how the external data capture that we just talked about is sometimes detrimental to the work of the nonprofit. In what ways have you seen, or what limitations do you see around that to actually work towards some of the structural and systemic change that we want? Because if the data sources are collecting to support the existence of said entity, how do we get data outside of that to be able to say, oh, there's a different way to do it? So I was just really curious, in what ways have you, across the spectrum of folks you work with, seen limitations in that? And then how have you, as the Capacity Collective, combated that and being able to support the nonprofits to speak to that?
Go ahead, Em. I see you excited.
I'm sorry. This is something I'm really passionate about. I also want to call out that we have a YouTube channel with a bunch of free recordings of previous trainings that we've given. And there are several that center around this topic. There's some about funder advocacy. And then I also gave a presentation this fall at a conference about intake forms that ended up talking about a lot of this stuff. And those we can share the link later. But
yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. We'll put that in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, but I think it comes down to this. Whoever is deciding what data to capture is deciding what's important, and they're controlling the story. So even though the nonprofits are the ones collecting the data and they are getting the data from participants, by simply choosing what questions to ask and what the response options are, that means that the funders are controlling the story. They're controlling the possible answers. If you think about race and ethnicity, right? If there's only 5 possible responses that people can input into your database and there's no space for comment on that, then you're just erasing a bunch of potential other stories to be told, and wow. It really is reductive, and it's really patronizing, because I think that, in the end, these larger funders are essentially saying, oh no, we know what's best. We know what's important, and we know how to store it much better than you ever could. Now, I know that that's not the intention of these funders, and a lot of it is well-meaning, and it's the idea is that it's easier for them to be able to analyze the data if it's in their own system and it's coming in consistently. I totally get that. But the impact is that it's really, dehumanizing, and it takes away so much agency and power from both the organizations that they're funding and also the communities that those organizations are serving. And it has if you want to talk about a ripple effect, it has a ripple effect because it really
thanks, Em.
Yeah, it can end up damaging the relationship between a participant and a staff member too. If you ever think about having to give a really terribly designed, having to ask someone a question that is a shitty question. It's terribly designed, that the response options are, really poorly worded, but that's how the funder wanted you to ask it. So you've got to ask it. And maybe you even give your disclaimer before you ask it that I'm so sorry, I have to ask it this way. But still, asking someone that question with those response options that don't resonate with their identity or that they find offensive, it can still damage their perception of the organization and the staff member. And that leads to broken trust, so it can cause real harm on many levels for funders to be, dictating how data happens at organizations, whether it's simply what data is collected or, even larger to you have to enter stuff into our database and you don't own your own data or your community's data.
Are you, in your conversations with your partners that you're working with, are you seeing that aha moment, or does an aha moment sort of have to happen? Because, so I run a community action program at CAP Agency, of which there's 1,000, I'm sure you've probably worked with some. There's 1,000 of us across the U.S. I'm not so convinced, and I think you're very diplomatic in saying that that federal and public funders don't mean to ask questions a certain way. I actually, the more I run a community action agency, the more convinced I do believe some of these questions are intentional to keep people, not above water on purpose. And so there is a lot of frustration there. Does there have to be any kind of sort of owned aha moment within the conversations that you're having for an organization to make that decision that it is their story to tell. It is their data versus the fear and condition, I think, that happens, particularly with public funding, and that risk of separating the story between the inputs that are required versus actually talking about true outcomes.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said outcomes, because I think that's I do feel that it is often intentional. And I can think of one, well, there's a million, but I can think of one in particular relationship that we have with an organization where the aha moment actually led to like emotion. Like there were tears. So it's an organization that's been doing fathering work in the community, father and child reunification and support with how to navigate, child support systems. And they've been doing this work for over 20 years. And all they've been doing is trying to collect anything they can in the moment, just to make sure that they can apply for the next grant and make sure that, they're telling the funder exactly what they want to hear. And one of the things that we did is we just had a conversation around like, well, what's important to you? Like when you're interacting with a family or a father, what do you guys high five over? Like, what is the oh, excellent. That's such a big thing. That's such a big win. And it's not the big stuff. It's our team calls it micro successes. Mm-hmm. We say like, what are the intervention points? What are the things that started, putting someone on a different path or with that fundamental change? And that's when this organization was like, we're not telling the right story. We're focusing on how many people were reconnected with their kids. Okay, so that's a big one. That's a big outcome. But there are so many little steps that it took to get there.
Right.
Like what if they got transportation? Because they knew getting transportation was a key element of getting reconnected with their kids. What if they went to court and got something cleared up or repaired the relationship that they had with the other parent? Like funders aren't asking for that, but those are turning points in someone's life. And they decided we're going to collect what the funder wants. And, when I was talking with them, we kind of used this motto of program first, funder second. Mm-hmm. And they flipped the script. And now I would say a majority of their data is collected for them and the communities they serve. And they're able to see what they're doing on a day-to-day rather than waiting sometimes years for someone to reach that funder-approved milestone. And it's changed our conversations. It's changed their organizational data culture. Like they all care so much because now they're able to see, yeah, look at that. Like, look at all these small steps we took and the impact it's having in people's lives. So it's really, it's asking folks, what do you care about? Like, why did you get into this work? What are the things you see and the trends that you see with your families? That's what they care about. I see you nodding.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you said, Marybeth, that I was being diplomatic because in my personal life, I am far more radical than I show up to these spaces in. But the reason that I try to be diplomatic is because I feel like we're always walking a fine line of
that's real.
Yeah.
We know that what a lot of what's happening is wrong, but we're trying to help support our clients. I mean, I think you saw it, Ron, in the conversation where I was present. We're I'm personally this is messed up, but I'm trying to make sure you still get your money so you can keep doing the good work you're doing, while also trying to secure a win for you. So I think, some of my favorite moments with our clients have been advocacy moments where we can support them in pushing back to funders to say, actually, we know what's important and y'all need to trust us because we're the ones doing the work.
I feel that from you. I do feel that from you, Em. And this is safe space. I've definitely said some things on this podcast that is not live yet that I'm certain will come back to haunt me at some point. But actually, I think we have to be warriors in this in some way. and speak up, because I don't know how else it changes, And to the same point you just made, Janae, of individuals making what others may view as a small step, which in that person's life is not small. It's a huge milestone and indicative of what may happen in the future. Funders, I don't think ubiquitously understand that, right? Because we're given 12 and 18 or maybe 24-month grant timelines, and no one lives their life that way. But also,
nonprofits.
especially, yeah, exactly. And I think, if we're not speaking up and being brave and courageous and saying that, I'm so thankful that you guys that you're both doing what you're doing. And with Marybeth too, that there's the three of you are warriors in this, because I don't know how else you help the nonprofit landscape without elevating and raising these issues, because it won't change otherwise. It won't change, and it's so frustrating.
The thing we're talking about too is not radical, right?
Right.
Again,
real.
we have this conversation. No, right? And we have this. This is cyclical. We come back to the idea that's this season and over the last few have really been driven home, is that a nonprofit is a business. If there was a for-profit company that wasn't collecting their data and then looking at it and refining it and making it better, like shareholders and funders, they'd be like, dude, what the frick are you doing? You have someone externally like tracking what you want to do for your sales and all your your research there. And so this idea that a nonprofit entity wants to do that for itself, to me, you shouldn't be radical, right? I'm the one that's providing the service, and I'm providing it to these clients. I should know if what I'm doing is having the impact that I want it to have. And so it's just like, we've been talking a lot about how post-pandemic, everything's wide open, right? Like there's a whole lot going on. But within the nonprofit sector, like this idea, like this thing's got to change. Like we watched Uncharitable. Marybeth and I were able to go out and see that. If you guys haven't tapped into that, I would encourage you to check out that movie. It was also a book first, but just broadly talking about this issue of nonprofits and how they're treated. I think also even the reality that in letting someone know that, hey, this is what works better, that we want to be professional and we want to be courteous. But at the same time, like this idea, like, oh, shoot, like within this power structure, if I don't say it in the right way, that we could potentially lose funding.
Right.
Is something that's really, really fascinating that I've come to learn in running my nonprofit and being in this space. And it's becoming more and more as board members,
Right.
You have before, but this is my first time kind of being on the philanthropic side of things and being able to have conversations at this level. And some of it I'm learning, if you're not in it, you don't know. You don't know what you don't know, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so to your point of being able to educate, is what we need to do. Within our work, we look at theories of change, right? And theories of change are broad. But what we know is that if someone is in a pre-contemplation state, all you can do is provide information. And so if we have a broad sector and system that's just in a pre-contemplation state where I really don't want to change, I would say that's probably where we are. If I could apply this to systems, is a because systems are made up of people. People are in a pre-contemplation, kind of transitioning to more of a contemplative state where you can start to really implement some things. But it's incumbent, as you said, Marybeth, for us to provide the information. Where else do they get their information to be able to hear these challenges?
Well, I think part of it also, on the data end, there's a lot of what's being asked of us also drives the judgment of how we can and can't spend money, right, within a grant. And you and I have faced that in the common grant that we've shared where our partnership started, is, when you think about the small steps that people need to make to get towards the bigger goal, a lot of funders won't let us spend, a lot of public dollars we're not allowed to spend on certain things, like, marrying and wrapping around rent relief with or court fees with job training and the whole person approach. It's very siloed. There's a lot of judgment in it, and it's also driven by what that funder wants from data, which doesn't ever show the whole picture. Yeah.
And to that point, one thing, you either collect the data that you don't want to collect, or you start serving participants that you really don't want to serve, because they will provide the information.
Alters,
And so you drift from mission to start serving a different population, because essentially you're picking those that you know will be most successful. So you pull the cream of the crop. And to your point, Marybeth, about is this some of this structured intentionally to keep a bottom rung? That's essentially what happens. There's certain folks that get left out because they're not going to be good for this report.
And we've talked about this in previous episodes where because of that action, it also dilutes the organization too. Because of the mission drift, we're not diluting our skill set, but we're diverting our skill set to a population that maybe we're not as focused on or as understanding of. And so we're diluting that and also competing within the ecosystem for the piece of pie, right? So it doesn't help the ecosystem either that we're not all moving towards our strength-based work, but we're diluting ourselves because of what we're chasing. We're chasing money.
I even think that capacity building sometimes unintentionally plays into that. And I have to shout out, I don't know if y'all have ever heard of the blog Nonprofit AF. It's written it's written by someone who used to be the executive director of another capacity building organization that we worked closely with in Seattle, Rainier Valley Corps. What's their new name, Janae?
They just go by RBC.
RBC now? Okay. But I think that sometimes there's this pressure, and this is what I was trying to talk about earlier, there's this pressure on small nonprofits to, capacity build, basically become experts at everything. Like, okay, well, we're giving you this like funding to work with these consultants so that you can now later do all the data stuff by yourself. But like, why do, like nonprofits have to learn how to be experts at everything? Why can't they also outsource some things like HR or data work or something if that's not truly where their interest and passion lies? Like some people will want to get involved in the data and have agency over it and like make that a part of their everyday jobs. And some organizations might not want to. And I think we have to recognize that like those choices are equally valid and funders need to stop pressuring organizations to become so self-sufficient when really, there's just a lot of pressure and trust, a lack of trust in organizations across the board from funders. It makes me really sad and angry.
And that's all overhead and administration, which you can't purchase. Yeah.
Because people don't very rarely are you given funding to even develop a system. Like, Ron, I'm not sure how y'all figured it out, but like a lot of the folks we work with, they're like, how are we going to pay for this data system? And if we buy it and we're in a 5-year contract, we can't guarantee next year we're going to be able to pay for it again. Right. And, I've seen many situations where, folks will get some unrestricted funds or some funds to, hire a new staff person. And they decide, do we hire a data person? Or do we hire, a crisis response case manager? That's not a fair decision for anyone to have to make. And so especially, the small, scrappy nonprofits are constantly being put in positions where they have to make these impossible choices. And then, the result is somebody who has 2 full-time jobs, and has 10 hats within the organization, but is tech savvy and, kind of cares about data. Now it's their job. And then, woohoo, we have a data person. No, you don't, so it's just this, it's cyclical in how we see even, from year to year, funder to funder, how it's just not changing.
One of the ways I was able to figure this out was I had the benefit and privilege of going to BU. Shout out to their nonprofit management and leadership program. And getting that graduate certificate, we talked a lot about data. They talked a lot about, as a nonprofit, it's not about a fancy new logo. It's not about having this new, all this. Like, you can do all that, but if you can't tell the story, even before that, when I was working at Straight Ahead, there was, they had hired a data guy, Jeff Keel. He was brilliant, man. He left IT and then came and did this work. And he would have this little presentation that he would sit down and he would break it down like this. He'd say, look, if someone came in and they asked for $100,000 and they said, hey, I have this story, right? Just this anecdotal story. And then you had someone came in and said, hey, I have all these numbers. And then you had someone come and say, I have this story and I have these numbers. Like, who would you be more likely to fund? And he just made it really digestible. And so that stuck with me even early on when I was a case manager sitting in those spaces. And so combined with all that, as I got to the ability to build legendary, where most folks don't have these privileges to kind of have those prior to launching. I was already having those conversations, and my mindset was focused in a vision of, we've got to collect the data right. We had been collecting data on the ground through a couple of these prescribed systems, and over time, like, I realized on the ground, it didn't mean anything. You're asking me how many jobs they got. I got guys that got jobs that's still carrying guns and banging. Like, so what does it matter? Also, with the way you were capturing it, was asking, there was no timeline on it. Did he work 30 minutes or did he work for a whole year? Right? Like, and so internally, part of our organizational values and my personal values, I was conflicted with being able to say, yes, we helped someone get a job. Yes, on the surface that was there, but in the ethos of really wanting to do the work that we're committed to, it seemed incongruent and in some ways duplicitous. And at the end of the day, the work that we're trying to do face to face with these people, I couldn't continue to have that conversation. And so it was that, and then being in those spaces, we were entirely blessed by God to be connected with Blue Cross Blue Shield and Common Impact. We had Layla Saad on, and Blue Cross Blue Shield and Lucy Dara came around, and I explained our project to the skills-based volunteering, and they were like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's how we were able to get here. And that's part of why I wanted you guys on the podcast, is to talk about how important this is. And we're just starting to be able to tell our story, right? Like, we kicked this off in June of this year. And we're still refining these things. And so it's going to take time, but it's all those privileges that were there. And as we talk about the ability to have innovative strategies, so when Marybeth partnered with us and Worcester Community Action Council partnered with us, they were a very unique and innovative funder to help us collect some of the things that we were doing. And so how do other folks come around? What are some of the innovative things that you've seen that are going on to help smaller nonprofits collect data and find ways? I know you said we were able to figure it out, but you guys are up against this all the time. So how are organizations figuring it out? And what would you suggest?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we've recognized a lot is that we work with a lot of assessments and different kinds of like standardized tools. And what we found is a lot of the organizations that we started working with in the beginning were serving immigrant and refugee populations. Often, English was not their first language. And there were so many limitations in the way that data was supposed to be collected that it was not like, it wasn't culturally responsive. It wasn't linguistically responsive. There were so many barriers. And so, having folks adapt the way they collect data, like sometimes in a culture, a survey is this like, you want me to do what? You're going to send me this link and I'm going to answer strongly, agree to strongly, just like, that doesn't work for me. And so we've just really encouraged folks, like, let's get creative. Like, let's step outside of this like academic standard of research and data collection and research methods and really get to how can we get the same responses, but in a way that makes folks feel comfortable or, is really flexible, that you can work with a variety of communities. Like, we've seen folks collect data on, giant posters on the wall and sticky notes. We've done focus groups. We've done, we call them like non-traditional data projects where we do photo voice or community storytelling. All of that is data collection. It doesn't have to be this rigid process where it all ends up in a spreadsheet. So we've seen folks really, I'm inspired sometimes when folks will say, I know this is a dumb question, but can we ... Yes, you can. Let's figure out a way to do it. So, I don't think we've worked with a single organization that hasn't pushed us to say, I wonder if we can do that. And it's really like, it's one of the things I wish funders would recognize is that you're really asking folks to go above and beyond with very minimal resources because they care about collecting this data, but they're not given the tools to do so. So I don't know. And because you've worked with some folks that have had to get really creative.
Yeah, I think that obviously we've been saying throughout this whole time, like, the ideal is that like the orgs and the communities that they're serving get to decide what data they're collecting. But like realistically, a lot of the times you have to choose your battles and sometimes you just can't push back against a funder, or it's not the time, or, you know, you can only push back against one or whatever. So I think our general approach and what we've seen be really effective is like, you know, again, choose your battles, and like when you can speak up, do that. But in general, look at the data you have to collect, streamline it and consolidate it to be as efficient and painless as possible. And then hopefully with the extra time and space that gives you, use that towards collecting the data that's important to you, so that you're not just like slapping and piling things on top of like already strenuous processes. Right. But first you've like sort of minimized, consolidated, and made easier the funder required stuff. And then you're like getting to, again, like adding the storytelling part. And I think that we've seen a lot of organizations do that to great success. And then that storytelling, sometimes that's something they share back to the funder to be like, hey, this is how we decided to collect data, and look at all the stuff you're missing. And that sometimes sways funders' minds. And also that storytelling is stuff that they can share back with community. They can use for like, you know, grassroots fundraising and stuff. It's really effective for them. So that's sort of like my compromise approach to, you know, again, like in an ideal world, we like wouldn't have to collect any data, and organizations would just do the work. Yeah, for nonprofits in the first place. But you know what I mean? Like we're getting there. So, you know, but like in an ideal world, me and Janae's jobs wouldn't exist. But in the, you know, in the real world, in the meantime, like we're going to practice a little bit of harm reduction, like try to make your existing data collection as painless as possible. And then, you know, think thoughtfully about what are a few selective, you know, creative ways that you can capture the rest of the story, which again, we have a few free trainings on our YouTube about.
To that point, I mean, I think all three of our organizations would say that we kind of have some kind of mindset that we're trying to make ourselves obsolete at some point, because we've solved whatever we're working on. I at least like having that mindset. But we've talked a lot. We've referenced funders a lot. But we talked mostly about the organizations and what they're doing. Have you seen a shift among any funders and any funders of influence in this work? And, you know, what have you seen in terms of, you know, trust-based philanthropy, I think is an edge of that. And I think we've seen some big influencers making some, what you would say, you know, big one-time grants that are trust-based type of philanthropy. But what kind of things have you seen among funders in the shift in mindset?
Wait. Before you go, let me grab this pen because I'm going to write these joints down. Go ahead. What's the funders you know that's willing to do this?
Name and contact information, please.
I was going to say, I feel like we've seen the most radical stuff from private funders. And that's without a doubt always true, that like it's always going to be government funders that are like more restrictive and stuff. So I've seen some really cool, like one of the orgs we're working with just got the largest guaranteed basic income pilot program in the US.
You guys we are doing it, yeah.
And that is a private funder, and they're basically just like, you tell us, like you just share stuff back with us that you think is important, which that's kind of crazy. That's amazing.
I will need to know the name of that.
It's probably more plugged into like sort of like government, state funders, and what they're seeing amongst them. So I'll let Janae speak to that.
Yeah, we've actually had, you know, we just go into this with a place of like, I don't know, like we're just curious. And it's really interesting to see how folks respond. But we've had some really good luck. So like this initiative we've worked with through King County, they've been very responsive with, we're like, this isn't working. And they actually hired our team to do an additional project to take one of the assessments that all of their organizations are required to use and make it culturally responsive. Like we had like a community group that informed this conversation, helped us to adapt the tool. Like they've been incredibly responsive. They've changed the way that they ask for data, some in good ways, some in not so good ways, but at least they're open to the conversation, which feels like movement to us. We've also seen, we work a lot in the perinatal and home visiting and doula space, and some of the state requirements are ridiculous. Like the amount of time and the amount of data that is required it's just unreasonable. And to go back and say, look, this is actually the important part. Like you're asking for things that really feel offensive and like you're going to use it against us to reinforce stereotypes. Like, can we knock that off? Like, you're funding us to do this specific work, and then you ask for these unrelated things that feel really invasive. And they have agreed. It's not been big movement, but it's been, this metric really problematic. This metric seems unnecessary. And so we're not like overhauling, it's not huge change, but the little wins are starting to add up. And, we work in the kind of early learning preschool space, and a lot of those spaces are, in evidence-based and have very specific funding and very specific data systems. And we recently just had a big win with one of the funders of, look, people are giving funding back, which you don't see very often, but they're literally saying, take the money back. Like, this is not worth it for us. Like, we don't want this. And so we were like, why? What do we need to do to help flip this script? And we've been having conversations at the county, state, and then national levels with this funder of, you guys got to do better. If this isn't working, if people are giving money back, you're doing harm. You're not actually, your whole point. If your whole point is to serve low-income families to get their kiddos in preschool, you're doing a disservice. And so we just come at it from a place of, advocacy and curiosity. And it's a little scary because I think that we're all, especially in nonprofit spaces, they're so like, don't ruffle any feathers, don't get on funders' radar because you don't want to lose funding. But we've actually been thanked multiple times. Like, wow, like, it's not a bad thing to have these conversations.
Yeah. Well, I will say the number one thing, if people take nothing else from this podcast episode, the number one most impactful thing that you can do right now without having to talk to any funders or anything, it's such a small change that has a huge impact, is to add a prefer not to answer option to all of your funder required questions. Because then you basically are giving yourself and your participants a secret backdoor to not have to disclose something that feels uncomfortable to them. And as you start to collect that data, down the line, you're going to come back to the funder and say, wow, look at how many people are saying that they prefer not to answer this question. Maybe you're losing data because of how you're asking it. Oh, by the way, we also asked the same question in a way that we designed, and look at the responses we got. So if you do nothing else, just adding that prefer not to answer option to funder required questions is hugely impactful. Yeah.
That is a great tip.
That's fire.
Away from unknown. Yeah, because a lot of folks will put unknown. It's not unknown. You don't have missing data, because that's another thing that folks are so afraid of, is they're like, I don't want to have bad data. I don't want to submit all of these blanks. I don't want to say we don't know. We do know. And so the prefer not to say, the prefer not to disclose, that's been a game changer. And to see the trends in folks responding to that, especially those invasive questions. Yeah. It's a
subtle difference from unknown,
exactly.
But it's a big difference too. Yeah.
So Janae and Em are dope. The entire team is dope. Capacity Collective is
amazing.
fire. We're going to make sure that we put the links to the Capacity Collective website in our show notes. We'll make sure that we also put some of the links. If you share those with me, I'll make sure that I get those to Marrio, our producer, and we'll put those in our show notes. So about to sign off, but we want to make sure that people who are listening, like, subscribe, share. And if you're listening and you want to reach out to Janae and them over at Capacity, man, I've had nothing but fantastic experience with them. Matter of fact, it's 11 o'clock. They got up at 8 o'clock in the morning just to jump on the call with us to have this conversation.
Well, I think we might need an episode 2.
No, there's an episode 2 because I didn't even talk to y'all about AI and like what's going on there. The other thing I was going to tell you before we sign off though is I have a friend.
Oh boy.
No, for real. He's a good dude.
Okay.
What's going on?
There's a joke coming. I know there's a joke coming.
I got a friend. Okay. And He designed a restaurant, and he was looking to grow. It was like a data restaurant. It was kind of crazy. It was going to be focused around data, but the problem that he was having was he didn't have enough servers.
It wouldn't be a ripple effect episode without a dad joke. It just wouldn't be.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't be.
But he didn't have enough servers.
I got it. I think we all got it. Sorry.
For the data.
We got it. Yes, we got it. Big workforce issues. Big workforce issues in the restaurant biz. Not enough servers.
Sure. All right, appreciate y'all, and
thank you so
everybody
much
for listening to the
Thank you
Ripple
for the
Effect.
work that you guys do, that you both did, that your whole team does. You have 5 people. I said 3 before, but thank you to have 5 great warriors doing this and working so well with partners and being good partners. I think that's a really critical thing. And thanks for your time this morning.
This is the Ripple Effect, the nonprofit imperative. Make sure you tune in next time. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, we definitely need to do an episode 2.
You're listening to The Ripple Effect, a nonprofit imperative with Ron Waddell and Marybeth Campbell. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you on the next one.